What if the most life-changing moments in your life didn't come from careful planning, but from the ideas you almost didn't trust? What if the decisions that shaped your future were the ones that surprised even you? And what if you said yes to something that didn't fully make sense and it changed everything? Well, 3 years ago, my husband and I went camping with a tent, a Subaru, a toddler, and today we're living in Panama. And this is the crazy part. The camping trip didn't change our life. It changed our thinking. And once your thinking changes, the whole direction of your life can start to shift. Because we didn't arrive here with certainty. We arrived through small, courageous decisions that changed what we believe was possible. Well, welcome everyone. Today is part of the 40 Days of Courage series, which is based on a book that I'm currently writing for mums. And if you're new here, you are on our weekly Call for Mum with a Side Hustle, where we meet up to encourage mums who have a dream in their heart to get a side hustle started. And this is just such a beautiful season of life because it's not necessarily the season when you have a very consuming life with children to build something big, but it can be the season where you get something started. And that's what it is for many mums, and I'm here to encourage mums on that journey of getting something started. Because becoming a mother is one of the most stretching, transformative journeys a woman can experience. Motherhood reshapes your identity, your priorities, your relationships, your faith, your capacity, and often your dreams. And somewhere along the way, many women begin to shrink, not because they're weak, but because they've poured so much of themselves into everyone else. But I believe this: you were never created to become just a mum. Now, let me be honest, motherhood is still sacred, but it's not the burial ground for your dreams. It's not the burial ground for your growth or courage or creativity, your leadership, your calling, and we can actually have both. And it will look different in every single season, but I am here to encourage you that if you want to be a mum, and you want to pursue your dreams, those two things are not mutually exclusive. They can happen together. And our series at the moment, it's not just about courage. It's not just about hustle. It's not about pressure, that's for sure. And it's not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming brave enough to become who God created you to be. And today's conversation is for women who feel like they're standing at a crossroads. So if you're a woman and you feel like you're standing at a crossroads, today's going to be for you. Maybe life looks good from the outside. Maybe you're really grateful for what you have. I know that I am. But deep down, you can still keep sensing a quiet nudge that there could be more. Maybe it's more growth, more pressure, more purpose, more adventure, more impact, more of the life God designed for you. The difficult thing about those nudges is they rarely arrive with a detailed plan. They usually arrive as an invitation, a whisper, a question, a sense that the road you're standing on isn't the only road available, and that's what today's chapter is all about. I'd love to read to you a version of the chapter. This is not exactly the one that's in the book, but it's edited for today. And I just want to acknowledge, I can see that there's 3 mamas in the YouTube live today. It's so great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me. And just, if you don't know, we actually do a Zoom call, that's why I said Zoom, after this live. And if you are interested in joining our live conversation, you're more than welcome. Just grab my free resource that I have attached to this call, and you'll get the weekly email with some links so you can join in. But it's great to have you here. Here is part of the chapter from the book that I want to share with you today. We thought we needed a caravan, months of saving, and a perfectly planned trip. But God whispered something simpler. Why not now? So with a tent, a Subaru, and far too much toddler gear, we even took a guitar that we never used. It was all stuffed into our Subaru Legacy. We headed off, and believe me, that car was full. Our son was 2 years old, almost two actually, so our plan was simple. We'd drive 3 or 4 hours each day, take our time. We weren't chasing destinations, we were simply enjoying the journey. What I didn't realize at the time was that this trip would become the beginning of an entirely different life. And as I've reflected today, I wrote this chapter last year, but as I reflected today, I've become even more aware of how key this decision and this part of our story really is. We needed space to make a difficult decision. We drove, we listened to audiobooks, explored lakes and mountains. We were in the South Island of New Zealand. We cooked our meals on a gas stove. I feel very nostalgic when I tell you about this. We slept in a dome tent with a very thin layer of canvas that blows to the side when it's windy, but something inside of us started shifting. For a long time, we had sensed God leading us towards stepping down from our role at church, which was a really difficult decision. We loved our church, we loved our team, we were worship pastors, we loved serving, and we felt an incredible sense of calling to that role. But we felt a call to something else, and so the decision we needed to make wasn't from hurt or offence, which is something we see a lot. I'm done because I've been hurt. But it was for us, if we made this decision to step down from that role, we actually had to let go of a dream. And I think that's why it was so difficult. We had imagined leading worship for years to come. We had imagined raising up other worshippers, building more teams, and investing our lives in that community for decades. I'd imagined our kids growing up in the auditorium during practice, being surrounded by worship and worshippers. And walking away from that vision felt like grieving something that hadn't died naturally. It felt like placing a dream on the altar before we fully understood why. And during those days on the road, God kept confirming something. There was more. A different season, a different assignment, a different path. And while we couldn't see exactly what that was, we knew that it was time to take a step. And what strikes me most, that is the piece of the chapter I want to share with you, with a few additional pieces. What strikes me most now about our story is that it wasn't really about the camping, as much as that was what I wanted to do. And I love camping. I love the simplicity and the complexity of being prepared, but the simplicity of sleeping in a tent, having less things with you, the freedom we had to just go on the road. We didn't book where we were going, we just drove and found places. And for me, this story is about having a pioneering spirit and doing things to the beat of a different drum. Like going away like we did, it was a little bit unusual. We hadn't seen many people do what we did, and it created enough space for us to hear from God. And what I want to share is that, when life becomes busy and familiar, it can be easy to assume tomorrow will simply look like today, repeated over and over again. Is anyone with me? Especially in the early years of motherhood, you just do the same thing every day. You've still got to get up early with the kids generally, get them some food. You've got routines you follow, things you do every day of the week. It can become quite structured, which is not a bad thing. But sometimes we need to get out of that environment to hear something fresh, to position ourselves, to start to think differently. And when we do, things can change. They changed for me, for my family, and I know they could change for you if that's what you're craving as well. You can start hearing questions that you couldn't hear before. You start seeing possibilities that are not visible from where you were standing. And the chapter that I wrote really is about the courage to pioneer. And I didn't know that when we made that decision. And I'll share soon how that decision happened. Pioneering sounds really cool until you're actually doing it, because pioneers don't get certainty. Pioneers get clues. They don't get the whole blueprint. They get the next step. And they don't get any guarantees. A lot of people want guarantees before they move, but there's no guarantees in pioneering. We sometimes want proof. certainty. We want to know that there's going to be a great outcome before we risk the discomfort. But that's just not what courage is. You know, courage usually feels uncertain, vulnerable, and small. But it's taking a step without knowing where the next 10 steps are going to be. And it's really learning to lean into the tiny intuitions that your heart notices. And it's about risk and flow and about going where you haven't gone before. During that trip, we started having conversations we hadn't had before. And we actually started asking different questions. You know, what if our financial future didn't have to be like everyone else's? What if we learned about business? What if we learned about money? What if we challenged some of the assumptions we'd always carried? What if God wanted to expand our thinking? And at the time, these were just conversations we'd had in camping chairs and long drives, tiny seeds, but seeds can become more. You know, they can become forests. And that trip allowed ideas about entrepreneurship, investing, personal growth, and building income differently to go deep, giving us the courage to say yes to the next crazy idea that came along, and that is another story. And here's what is fascinating about this to me, and maybe to you too, is that none of this was actually the goal. Like, we weren't planning on Panama. The goal was not Panama. The goal was not moving countries. Definitely not. The goal at that point was not even like leaving where we were living. Like, that was not a goal. The goal, like part of the goal was obedience, you know, was to follow curiosity, to allow the Holy Spirit to lead us, you know, with ideas. This is actually before I started Bum with a Side Hustle. That was like later down the track. The goal was becoming the kind of person who could follow God's calling, could follow God's whispers beyond what was familiar and what was the model of everyone else around us. And then 3 years later, we sold our house, not because we'd planned that, not because it was some grand master strategy, but because of the courageous step we took back then to go on this big trip. And eventually the opportunity appeared that the old version of us would never be able to say yes to. We just weren't positioned for it. And today we're living in Panama. I can honestly say it's one of the greatest seasons of growth that we've ever experienced. You know, but it actually didn't begin in Panama. It began in the Subaru with a tent, a toddler, and the courage to ask different questions. Yeah. What a fun and crazy time. I thought about sharing a picture of us on the trip. Maybe that will be the thumbnail for this video. But it was just such an amazing trip. And really, really, we spent so much time talking, enjoying one another. We'd been so busy. We'd just been in such a busy season. I don't know, we'd done multiple conferences that year, multiple services. It was kind of a little bit post-COVID, so if anyone else was involved with church around that time, you were either recording at home or at church, worship sessions for the church to sing along to on a Sunday, or doing multiple services because we had restrictions on how many people could be in the building. It was a busy season. Anyway, let's bring this down to what it's like for us mums, okay? I think that sometimes mums can accidentally stop pioneering. And if you're listening to this call, you're probably a pioneer. You're probably the kind of woman who likes to push the boundaries. You have a desire for more. That's who you are, and that's probably why you're here listening to this. And so motherhood and the complexities of motherhood and the life change that you go through can actually it can put aside a pioneering spirit, you know. And it's not like laziness and you're not capable. It's just that the season of motherhood is so consuming. It needs stability. It needs responsibility. And you have to become the expert at caring for everybody else's future. But meanwhile, your dreams can get quietly pushed aside, you know, and it can get pushed aside but I pray that it never disappears fully out of your mind. I think that it's still sitting there, and I find that a lot of the mums who do the Master the Code Challenge, they have to write this list of dreams, and it's at that point that some of these dreams that they had prior to motherhood or in between large seasons of, children, big gaps, there were dreams that they had that got put aside that come back again. And sometimes those dreams, let's say it like this, can get buried beneath laundry baskets, school lunches, routines, and responsibilities. But I believe that God always gives us opportunities to question again, to decide if we can do both. Can we do both? What else is possible? What could I become? What could I build? And what dream keeps returning? What dream just doesn't go away? Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is pay attention to these questions. And this is where I want to name what you're actually doing. You're pioneering. You're breaking the mold. Maybe it was your mum or your church friends or your expectations of yourself, but no matter where you learnt it, you learnt that life had to be a certain way. And pioneering is choosing to not go the certain way. It's choosing to find a new path. A pioneer actually creates the path. I like to think about it as the arrowhead. The arrowhead pierces through, and that's what pioneering is, so that others can follow. And that's the way my husband and I have started to see the journey of our life, is that we're actually at a arrowhead. I don't want to be arrogant and say we're at the arrowhead, but we're at an arrowhead, and the decisions and the things we've done, at the very least, have totally impacted the future of our children and maybe our generations to come, the people who will be in our legacy. And I think often the biggest decision we have to make is taking a risk to be a little unexpected, a little crazy. We decided to go on that trip around the South Island in our Subaru before we had a plan to pay for our mortgage, because if we're not in our house, Zeph's not doing gym work. He wasn't working for a security firm. Where was our income going to come from? And then I was sitting in the driveway one day in the car, and just like, we can Airbnb dropped into me, and I was like, And I got excited, and I started thinking and started chatting to Zeph, and that idea alone, we did it for 3 Christmases, and it actually meant we had amazing Christmas holidays because we had money coming in. So we more than paid for our mortgage. And I think that's such an important piece of the story to understand, because to follow a crazy idea actually means you're following an idea before you might have the answer for everything that's about to happen. And we pioneered in that season in a way we hadn't seen other people do. I know people do it all the time, but we hadn't seen that. And it opened up our whole world. I want you to think about this honestly for yourself tonight. What crazy ideas have you followed that worked out well for you? Because I'm sure there are some. And this series is all about all the crazy things that I've done. But I hope that they trigger memories of things where you have broken out of the mold occasionally. If you're such a rule follower, I tend to be a little bit of a rule follower, so breaking out of the mold is quite memorable for me. I just had a new memory come to mind. Maybe that's another story for the book. I won't share it now. But what crazy ideas have you followed that worked out well for you? Is there an area where you sense God inviting you to think bigger? What possibility keeps returning to your mind no matter how often you push it away? And what would you pursue if you weren't worried about looking different from everyone around you? And these are awesome questions to think about. So this week, I want to challenge you to identify one area where you've been assuming your current reality is your only option. So ask yourself this: what else might be possible? Okay, you don't need a 5-year plan. You don't need certainty. You don't need everyone else's approval, but you just need the courage for that next step, because tiny courage changes lives. Well, mamas, thank you so much for being here. If today's conversation has stirred up something inside you, and you know that there's more than just sort of surviving through this season, I did create a guide from the last 2 years of doing Mum with a Side Hustle, and it's all of the things that I use to grow myself, to get educated, to understand what kind of side hustles are actually going to be productive and what kind of side hustles are going to probably take more than I need to be taken from me. So yeah, there's 5 really great ways to get yourself started with a side hustle. And they're not necessarily business ideas, although I have got some information on there on a type of business that I think is a really great one for mums. But it's about helping women expand their thinking, rebuild their belief in themselves, and start exploring what's possible in this actual season of life. In this crazy busy season, is it possible that I could be doing something now that is building a foundation for the kind of business and income that I would like in the future? Because changing your life always starts with learning to think differently, and this resource is all about learning. Definitely a lot of learning. And sometimes it starts with discovering that you're capable of much more than you thought. And if you need a cheerleader, I am here every week. I'm here to cheer you on. And there's a link below if you need a copy. It'll be in the comments section. It'll be in the description of this video. Okay, we're going to come to a close. I want to leave you with this one thought. The people who build extraordinary lives are rarely the people who have the perfect plan. They're usually the people willing to take the next courageous step before they can see a whole path. You know, you guys are not behind. You may simply be standing at the beginning of a road that other people can't see. So I encourage you to keep walking. You know, the path actually reveals itself to those who move. And I want to say thank you for being here today, and I will definitely see you next week for another chapter of 40 Days of Courage. And if you would like to join, I did mention this at the beginning, but if you've joined us since, we have a Zoom room after this call, and love to have you there. If you grab my free resource, I can get the link to that Zoom room to you, and you can join us next week. But yeah, blessings everyone. See you later.